But I think a more sustainable model would be to do exactly what we are doing, to say, look, in addition to supporting our workforce, meeting our obligations towards the workforce, how can we make sure we encourage the spirit of entrepreneurship? That is, people looking beyond paid employment to start their own businesses. That is how you create the middle class. People should be able to say, look, we want to move towards, creating our own businesses. All the government needs to do is to give some kind of structural support, maybe financial support or infrastructural support or legislative support to make sure that people who started their businesses are able to thrive. Look at the person who created WhatsApp. It doesn't work in a government parastatal. It doesn't work in the oil industry. ICT is, in fact, the next frontier. People should be able to start businesses, employ themselves, and create employment for others. But it starts with this mentality that, look, entrepreneurship is the frontier to go, not necessarily seeking upon graduation from the university or wherever you're coming out from to get embedded in the state civil service structure. Because in all honesty, even the most well-intended administration can't employ everyone at the same time.
What do you think of this argument that some governors make where they say, look, they have to be careful of how this minimum wage is either increased because they can't afford to concentrate that kind of resources on less than 50% of the population, so others will also get to be paid at the end of the day.
Yes, but I think that we need to have a more proactive leadership across the country. A situation where state governors can't pay salaries is beyond scandalous. I mean, how in Osun State, for instance, we've seen situations where, for the past 10 months, workers are are literally fed by churches, charity organizations. It's scandalous. I think that state governors ought to be able to rise to the challenge of tapping into the genius of their own people. And not simply wait endlessly and these days, fruitlessly for federal allocation to come. We've seen that 74% of the monies that make up the federation account come from typically the 6 or so oil-producing states. And the rest of society, the rest of the country seems to be dependent on this kind of revenue. I think that if we really want to move on a sustainable path, states must must tap into their own genius. Do they want to diversify the economy away from the extractive sector, oil and gas, or should they focus on the service sector? Should they focus on agriculture? Should they focus on entertainment, the creative industries? We need to be a lot more creative than simply, talking all the time about diversifying the economy and waiting for oil resources.
Does that then mean that if oil were to be maybe say $10 per barrel, won't Rivers State have problems?
No, what Rivers State is doing, especially in this dispensation, is to make sure that not only do we go into agriculture, we want to mechanize the sector. There is a massive investment going on in research and development in agronomy in Rivers State, fish farming, all kinds of things to make sure that we truly move away from the extractive economy of oil and gas. That's one part. The second part is we want to also invest in the knowledge economy because, you really need knowledge, extensive technical expertise in order to turn things around. To think that our wealth is oil and gas, which is natural wasting resource, is an insult, in fact. To keep hearing this kind of thing about an oil-rich region, an oil-rich state, is an insult, in fact. I think that our best option, the most sustainable option, our richest asset is, in fact, our own people. So what Governor Wiki has decided to do is to so dynamize our educational system in such a way that there is massive and conscious, deliberate investment in knowledge economy, so that the more people know, the more they're able to create wealth for themselves and create wealth for others. As I said, the fellow who created WhatsApp, he only dynamized the technology that already exists. And today, we have over 1 billion people using that technology. It doesn't work in Rivers State. It doesn't work in Nigeria. It doesn't work in the extractive economy.
Do you think if they were to change the laws such that states can then legislate upon how much minimum wage they can pay, would that help?
Well, I think that beyond the laws, what we need is a federal system, frankly speaking, not just federalism in name, but federalism in practice. What this means is that whatever resources that you have, whether they are human, whether they are technical, or whether they are natural. You should be able to control them, harness them for the fullest benefit of your own people. If it is a natural resource, you may pay resource tax to the center so they can use it for common goals like immigration, defense, and the rest of the foreign affairs. I mean, if you're going to mine for platinum in South Africa, you don't go to Pretoria to get a lease. You go to the king of Mafeking to do that. But if you're going to, drill oil in Nigeria, you don't go to the owners of these resources. We've got this massive mammoth of legislation that says these resources are basically expropriated and centralized in such a manner that the resources are extracted and that the resources are then sent to the center, who then gives handouts across the states. If we do this, as we've done over the past 50, 55 years, since 1958, we are going to have exactly the same problem. Any economy that is almost disproportionately based on natural resources will suffer. I mean, look at what is happening in Russia. They have the same problems that we have, but they have a very extensive technical industry, an ammunition industry, by the way, which is why they don't have exactly the same kind of helpless situation that we have. Look at what is happening in Kuwait, what is happening in Saudi Arabia. Look at what is happening in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi. They all, are resource-rich countries. But the service sector in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, is so developed that although their own total population is less than 2 million, they continue to build airports that can accommodate 18 million passengers every time. So what we are saying is, why don't we move away from the extractive economy to the service sector, for instance? Why can't we, invest in our hotels? Why can't we invest in other sectors rather than depend exclusively on?
And I'm sure, as you found out, that this kind of diversification does take time. Abu Dhabi and Dubai and all these other places didn't happen overnight. It took tenacity. In fact, in the kind of dreams that these people had, people wondered if they had gone insane. And it's only now that people are beginning to appreciate the work that they had put in the past. So much as the foundations can be dug now, there's still questions as to what happens in the meantime. For instance, what happens to workers who are still saying 18,000 naira minimum wage is too small and the cost of living has gone up, which is the truth. What then happens, in that space of time when we're hoping to diversify and earn more resources and still be able to ensure that the workers go home with a decent salary?
My worry is not so much, the tendency, they talk about diversifying the economy. My worry is more about what is being done in that actual terrain of diversification. As I speak to you now, there is no, at least at the center, there is no single policy implementation happening. Not one. What is happening in the agricultural sector now as we speak over the course of 1 year at the center? To the best of my knowledge, nothing is happening. So the example you gave about Abu Dhabi is excellent. I agree. It takes a lot of time. But don't forget that in the past 20 years, just in the past 2 decades, Abu Dhabi was just sand, was just desert. So, if you periodize their development, it doesn't take such a long time. I suspect that what is missing in our own case, it's not just time as much as the lack of visionary leadership.
No, Commissioner, my question is more about what happens in the now. As for what has been happening at the center, I think the people at the center would, defend themselves. We spoke to the Minister for Solid Minerals, and he did say some fine things that they have been doing there, but we leave them to answer the questions by themselves. And the Minister of Agriculture will definitely tell you what he's been doing. But looking at what happens in the meantime, while we diversify, because I'm sure the River State government is also looking to diversify its local economy away from oil, and the results will not show immediately. The question is, what happens in the meantime?
In the meantime, I think what we need to do is to do exactly what we are doing in River State, to make sure we have good priorities. In River State, we don't stretch ourselves too thin. We don't take in so many things at the same time.
So do you think that if the minimum wage is increased, for instance, it will stretch you a little too thin?
Oh, yes. You see, what we are doing is to say, look, we don't just want to make promises which down the road we won't be able to implement. If we say we are committed to paying such and such an amount of money as minimum wage, we don't want to go back on it. Right now, our commitment is to say, look, we prioritize workers' welfare, we will pay the minimum wage, we will make sure we don't owe salaries, we will make sure we pay all arrears, we will make sure that we meet our obligations towards our workers.
The reason why I ask you this is because you know that the minimum wage, I mean, as you know, is on the exclusive list, and whatever is negotiated at the federal level, you know, will definitely affect the state. So states will definitely be interested to see what's going on at the federal level. Are you comfortable with the posture of labor on this 56,000 naira minimum wage?
Well, I wouldn't support one figure or the other, but I'm sure you will agree that if you look at the commodity prices in the market, you don't need labor to tell you that the dynamics have changed. You know, pure water that used to sell for 5 naira now sells for 10, 15 naira. Commodity prices have changed. And so to have this kind of constant dynamics, you know, changing around the markets and have the minimum wage stuck at a particular point, there's a disjuncture. And so I can understand sentimentally, at least, you know, where labor is coming from. But that's one part. The second part is the states making commitments and following through. Those state governor has said, you know, they will pay 25,000 away from 18,000. That's a good thing. What we want is to make sure that we unfailingly meet our obligations. If it's 18,000, we must make sure we pay these, we meet these obligations, you know, every month. As our revenue base improves, as we catch more and more individuals and companies in our tax net, as the fruits of our diversification effort yields, you know, to the point where our revenue base actually increases, of course, we will then look at the structure of the minimum wage and say we can pay so much ahead of the 18,000. That's where our priority lies right now.
All right, Dr. Austin Tam George is the Commissioner for Information in Rivers State. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we'll be back in just a moment.